There's a shop on a street I barely remember walking down, though I must have passed it 1,000 times. It's the kind of place you don't think twice about, blending into the dull backdrop of the city. No windows, no displays, just a simple sign hanging from a rusted chain. Bad habits for sale. I couldn't tell you why I went inside that first time. Curiosity, boredom, maybe it was exhaustion, the kind that sinks in deep when the days start blending together. Either way, I found myself there again today, the door creaking as it closed behind me. The shop was dim, lit by a single flickering bulb that cast long shadows over the shelves. The shelves themselves were lined with jars, simple, unadorned, but each one labeled in the same shaky handwriting: impatience, procrastination, overindulgence, self-pity. They stretched on endlessly, it seemed, row after row of familiar vices. I moved through the aisles slowly like I always did, not quite sure what I was looking for, but knowing I'd find it. The air was thick, stale, and the soft hum that always filled the room was louder than I remembered. Maybe it was just my head, tired and clouded, but the sound seemed to follow me, clinging to my thoughts like a low, constant buzz. At the counter sat the shopkeeper, just as unremarkable as the shop itself, middle-aged, balding, with a cigarette hanging loosely from his lips. He barely looked up when I entered, his eyes glued to the small TV beside him, where static flickered over an old infomercial. I wandered through the aisles, picking up a jar labeled "Distraction." The glass was cool in my hand, and the contents inside swirled slowly, like smoke trapped in a bottle. I turned it over, reading the label again, feeling a strange sense of familiarity like I'd held it before. I probably had. "How much for this one?" I asked, more out of habit than anything else. The shopkeeper didn't even glance up from the TV. "You've already paid," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You've been paying for years." The words hit me harder than they should have. Already paid. Of course I had. I'd been paying for it, paying for all of it, long before I ever stepped foot in this place. The late nights spent doing nothing, the endless scrolling through screens, the excuses piled up so high I could barely see over them. I had paid with every wasted moment, every opportunity I let slip by, every hour I spent convincing myself there was always more time. I set the jar back on the shelf, my hand suddenly feeling too heavy. I could hear the hum again, louder now, vibrating through my skull. I glanced at the other jars. Regret, nostalgia, apathy. They all seemed to shimmer under the dim light, beckoning me to pick them up, to hold them, to remember how easily they fit in my hands. "You don't need anything new," the shopkeeper said, as if reading my thoughts. "You've got enough already." I looked at him finally. He wasn't watching the TV anymore. His eyes were on me now, tired and knowing. I wanted to argue, to say that this time was different, that I was just browsing, just passing through. But the words felt hollow before they even reached my lips. I didn't need anything new. He was right. I'd been carrying these habits with me for so long. They were part of me. I'd been paying for them in minutes, in years, in pieces of myself I couldn't even remember losing. And now, here I was, back again, staring at the same shelves, the same jars, like it was all some kind of ritual. I walked to the end of the aisle where a jar labeled "Disillusionment" sat on the lowest shelf. I knelt down, hesitating before picking it up. The glass was darker than the others, almost opaque, and the contents inside didn't swirl or shift. They just sat there, heavy and still. I knew this one too. It had been with me for years, lingering in the background, filling the spaces between ambition and reality. "You've already paid for that one too," the shopkeeper said softly. I stood up, clutching the jar in my hands, staring at the label, the familiar weight pressing into my palms. I had paid for it, over and over again. With every moment of doubt, every dream I let rot in the back of my mind, every time I told myself that nothing mattered anyway. It was a revelation, but not the kind that came with relief. It was the kind that settled in deep, with a slow, creeping dread. I had been paying for these habits with time I couldn't get back, and I would keep paying, day after day, year after year, until I was nothing more than a collection of these jars, gathering dust on a shelf. I didn't ask for the price again. I didn't need to. I placed the jar back on the shelf, feeling its weight leave my hands, but not my chest. "You'll be back," the shopkeeper said, lighting another cigarette, his eyes drifting back to the screen. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I knew it was true. I walked out of the shop and into the gray street, the hum still buzzing in my ears. The door creaked shut behind me, and the sign above swayed gently in the wind. "Bad habits for sale," it read, as if it had always been there, as if it always would be. And I kept walking, knowing I'd be back. I always came back. Thanks so much for listening, guys. A quick shout out to my patrons: Kevin Kess, Sabiel Eclipse, 055555, Cormac Wells, Amara, Matthew Steiner, Cupcake Hips, Alonzo, Mr. Sankofa, Michael Milburn, Kozak, Icy Narrates, Jesse Hartley, Eric Cifuentes, Andreas Anderson London, Lawrence Wallen, Geek Sanctuary, Melissa Perez, and this guy. That is someone's actual username. I love that. Thanks again so much for watching, guys. If there's anything you would like me to pray for, I would love to know how I can be praying for you. I hope you have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next video.